No, well, thanks so much, and thanks for letting me go lucky last. So my name's Simon Lucey. I'm the director of the Australian Institute for Machine Learning. For those of you who don't know much about the Institute, we are currently ranked second in the world in an area of machine learning called computer vision. It was actually one of the big reasons I came back to Australia. I was previously a tenured professor at Carnegie Mellon University. The fact that we had something like that in Australia, I think as David knows, I'm actually originally from Queensland, so I've got no link to South Australia at all. But AIML really twisted my arm, and I was very proud and keen to come back. We've won a bunch of awards in the past in different benchmarks. For those of you who are know the machine learning world, a lot of benchmarks in autonomous driving, cityscapes, Pascal. One thing that AIML is quite famous for, and actually the previous director, Anton Benenhengel, really took a lead in, was this interaction of computer vision and natural language together. And in particular, something called visual question and answering. And so we're a reasonable powerhouse. It's probably us and Georgia Tech that are probably the two leading groups in the world in that space. We do a lot of stuff in medical machine learning, and we know that Australia is a graying country, like a lot of Western democracies. And so anything that we can do to make our hospital systems work more efficiently is something of great interest. We have the Australian Space Agency right next to us on Lot 14. And so we've been involved in a lot of competitions in that regard. So the competitions run by the European Space Agency. And in fact, we got a runner-up in a recent NASA competition too. And so just to kind of talk a little bit about like where I came from, as I mentioned, I was coming from CMU, and you can kind of see I spent 12 years of my life there. And if you haven't been there, it's a very, very interesting city. It was a Rust Belt city that fell on hard times in the 1970s and really reinvented itself in terms of its tech and health sector. And that's something I kind of see a very, very commonality to Adelaide. Adelaide obviously didn't fall on as rough a times as Pittsburgh, but is definitely going through a bit of a renaissance at the moment in terms of it's really heavily investing into tech at the moment. And evidence of that is from the state government's investment in Lot 14. Hopefully when the borders open up again and everyone can kind of fly in, if you come to North Terrace, they've got this lovely sector now where we've got this great location on North Terrace, and we've got a lot of companies now setting up just right next to us. So Amazon Research, MTX, Accenture, Google, and the list is growing. And what's really great with that is my experience in the States was that a lot of the leading professors in machine learning had hybrid appointments in industry. And one important thing was that it's tight geographical locations between the two. And that also leads to great outcomes for students. So most of our students basically got to spend some time within those companies, which was a great path for jobs, but also a great path for finding out the types of problems that really matter, that'll have impact. And so it's a great ecosystem that they're trying to build there. And again, I've largely inherited this, but it's something I'm very proud to kind of speak to. So one thing that AIML's really interested in, and I can kind of speak to quite closely, is this idea that machines are starting to act like us. And I was quite lucky to work in the autonomous car industry for about 3.5, 4 years. I had a hybrid appointment with a company called Argo AI. It was born out of Pittsburgh. It's a joint venture between Ford and Volkswagen. And but what's really interesting with it is you're seeing these machines drive. And if you visit Pittsburgh or any of some of the cities in Europe, in the US now, you can see these cars driving around by themselves. But what's really interesting is that they have to go through, they get these scenes of a street, and then they basically use AI and ML to kind of detect objects, predict how fast they're moving, and do a lot of other tasks. But and a lot of this has been driven by these advancements in, we say machine learning, but the real thing that's driving it all is a thing called deep learning. And deep learning goes back to this important event in 2011, 2012 at NeurIPS. There's this very, very famous paper that came out called AlexNet, and it really just changed the world. And so all of a sudden, since 2012, you've seen this precipitous drop in perception and many other tasks thanks to deep learning. And it's been transformational. But one of the problems with deep learning, modern deep learning, is even though it's allowing machines to sort of act like us, so like if you think of sort of like performance, like human-like performance, it definitely doesn't learn like us. So if I've got this sort of log scale in terms of data, the amount of information I need to give to a modern deep learning system is inordinate and compared to a human. And this is really problematic because what's happening is that it really biases large multinationals with large amounts of data and large amounts of compute. It's not a great path forward for Australia, who's a middle power, and it's never going to be able to kind of outspend these companies and these governments. So what we really believe in is basically fundamentals are the future. So basically investing in our people, investing in fundamental ideas in mathematics and technology. And that's the way that we can kind of drive things forward. Because what we really want is basically a future of ML where lots of people can innovate and take part. And I'll give you guys a simple example. You may have sort of come across this thing. It's been in popular press, this thing called GPT-3, developed by OpenAI. Very, very interesting matter. It's scary how good it is. Like a lot of people talk about how important it's going to be for our kids to learn how to code. I'm not so sure about that. You go and sort of put in bullet points of, I want to draw a face in the middle of the screen at position 3030, produce it in HTML code. And GPT-3 can just, done. It's got like sort of potentially programming could be like machine code for us, like in a generation or two. But how it works, actually, it's just sort of ingested huge amounts of text data. But one of the issues with it is that if you're a private citizen and you wanted to actually train up, and I'm not saying like innovate or develop, I just simply train the model up. If you were to kind of pay for that on an Amazon instance, it would cost you $4.6 million just to train it once. That's the budget of most SMEs and most universities. So we've got this horrible situation at the moment in AI where we've got a lot of algorithms being released that people can't replicate. We can't match because we just simply don't have the compute. So one thing we've been thinking about a lot, in another example is sort of driverless cars. A teenager might only require 75 hours to be accredited to sit behind a wheel. Whether they should be or not, that's a different question. But say we have companies that are having like millions, sometimes billions of miles, and they're still not able to kind of drive on the road. And so it really speaks to that mismatch in terms of how effectively we use data. So one of the things that the Australian Institute of Machine Learning and I've inherited has sort of really made a mission is sort of how can we kind of bridge that gap? How can we bridge the gap between how machines learn and humans learn? So not just simply matching the performance, but using data efficiently. And so that's a big goal of ours, is sort of really kind of pushing that forward, that agenda forward. And really, we feel that that's the way that sort of like strong middle power democracies like Australia are really going to take advantage of AI in the 21st century. So yeah, so to kind of like really kind of sum it up, I didn't speak too much about AML. AML's got around we've got about 140 people and they're 12 academics. We're growing. We just got awarded a big federal grant called the Centre for Augmented Reasoning, which is very much aligned with this. It's a $20 million grant. So in the next 12 months, we should be growing to about 170. Australia has this once in a generation opportunity for economic rejuvenation through AI. So I believe it's ours to seize. I believe our institute's not just about how to make machines learn like us, but not, to learn like us, not just act like us. And that's sort of a real punch point for us. And third, basically AI is a sovereign capability that we must protect, grow and nourish here in Australia, and is hopefully the future of economic prosperity for our kids and our kids' kids. Cheers. Thank you.